Welcome to one of many Blue Room podcasts this week. And as always, we do many every single week, but I think there'll be a few more this week after there's been, well, me and Mike were arguing about this. Mike Greenall's with me, and Peter Mack's going to join us in a moment or two. But yeah, we funnily enough, just before we started recording this, me and Mike, he said, "Oh, has he been sacked?" And I said, "Where have you been all day? He sacked ages ago." And he said, "No." He said, "I've seen all that." He said, "Have the club said anything?" And I was like, "Oh yeah." The people that actually sack someone and are meant to tell everybody are the ones that remain who haven't said a word yet. So we had a laugh and a joke, thinking that we might even get a new contract. He might well still be there. We might well see some sort of board meeting that have said Frank Lampard's been given a 10-year deal. But the first thing I wanted to get into about Mike, because we've spoken at length about this, haven't we, the last few weeks and months now. You must be, out of all the journalists and all the Everton related journalists, Everton related supporters, you are definitely the only person that I know that thought Frank Lampard shouldn't have been Everton's manager quite early on in this season. Certainly, obviously before New Year, but when would you say you initially started with? And obviously, you felt it was when we first got him, besides the Palace game keeping us up. But when would you say you first probably were like, this fella shouldn't be the Everton manager?
I think it was just trying to have a look at the fixtures this season when the run. I think the main one really, and it sounds a bit silly considering what the games were. Obviously, we'd had a bit of we hadn't picked up many victories in the opening 6 or 7 games, and then I think we finally got 2 on the bounce against West Ham and Southampton.
Yeah.
And obviously, as you know, I'm quite into looking at the data and the underlying metrics to judge performances, and ultimately in terms of how a season progresses, especially when you're judging off the opening 7 or 8 games of the season. The thing that matters the most is the performances. Obviously, you want to get points on the board, but in terms of judging where the club's going to be come the end of the season, it's how you getting those points. And whilst we weren't winning games up until West Ham and Southampton, we were performing like a team that was going to be in a relegation battle again, and then we got those wins, and I think it kind of, I mean, I like to be as objective as possible, but everyone, you get a couple of wins in a row on the board, you are ultimately going to feel happy about the situation. But then I think after that, we had 3 terrible performances in a row against United, Tottenham, and Newcastle. Where, I mean, listen, the difference in quality is vast. So I didn't expect us to get anything out of those games anyway. But in terms of how open and how passive we were, especially after, I think it was around about the time where I must have been on a couple of podcasts with Matt, for instance, and he was trying to get me to talk about Everton's defensive solidity in the early stages of the season, but I wasn't exactly agreeing with that sentiment, and at that point, that's when in terms of the amount of chances we were conceding, we're starting to match up with the goals we were conceding, and the performances didn't really step up from them, to be honest. So I think after that run, I think the Crystal Palace performance was just after that run of defeats. But even then, that Palace game is a little bit of an anomaly compared to the rest of the season in terms of the performance anyway. And even then, I don't think it was as brilliant as people tried to make out to be. But I think going into, I think I've said it before with yourself. When he was appointed last season, I wasn't his biggest fan. But my viewpoint on the whole situation was that he's got, first of all, he's got to keep the football club up, and then second of all, he's got to prove that he's, deserved the job, deserves to take on the job after the summer. Basically, I don't think. I understand people's, want for stability and everything, but I don't think those two kind of interlinked. I think he could have easily kept us up, and I think if we were ruthless enough, I think we could have turned around and said, cheers for doing the job, but we're going to go in a different direction now, which I think a smart club probably would have done. But I understand why we didn't. And then there was almost a second point where I think that type of decision came again, where he had the opening 15, 16 games of the season, before the World Cup break, and then that was like another judgment point where, you know, right, we've given you the summer, we've given you the pre-season, you know, of a fashion in terms of the, you know, the debacle with recruitment. But you've got until that period to prove that you should, you know, continue as Everton football manager. And to be honest, I don't think he did enough. I just don't. And I think, especially, and I thought that before the Bournemouth, the Bournemouth games back to back. Those Bournemouth
7-1
games,
defeats in
really,
total.
yeah. The Bournemouth games really were just the final nail in the coffin as far as I was concerned. That was the perfect opportunity. You know, I'm sure we'll talk about potential replacements at some point in this podcast or throughout the week. But there were opportunities for the club to make decisions then that probably aren't open now because they've stalled and they've waited and they've hoped that things will turn around rather than you know, expect and rather than actually do anything about it. I suppose, you know, it's obviously difficult, and I understand why the club. I really don't. And I understand why fans have wanted to give Lampard time because, I mean, you hope that he can turn around, but you can't run a football club on hope.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. That it's hope more than expectation. I mean, it's been that way with Everton for as long as I've known it. To be fair, hope rather than expectation. But when you get to that stage that you're talking about there, it's almost like I think, and certainly from many people I've spoke to on social media today, have been really sad that he's going because he's such a nice guy. And like, whilst I appreciate that, I think you said similar then. I appreciate that, and you do have to give people opportunities. And I think that many would say he earned that after the win against Palace that kept us in the Premier League. But then I think if you dig a little bit deeper than that, and look, this is in hindsight, so I don't want to dwell on it too much, but looking back on that situation, I'm thinking, well, what were our results like when we approached that, when he initially took over from Benitez, which is very nearly a year ago. In fact, we're a week away from a year ago, so he's lasted just under a week before he was sacked. I didn't look at games at the time, apart from, I think, Leeds at home, which I think was his first Premier League game at home, wasn't it? Or was that after Newcastle away? Just before Newcastle away. Newcastle away was dreadful. I went to that. But
no, I think it was Brentford in the cup, and then it was
that's it. Brentford the 4-1 against Brentford, which obviously that's going to get everybody's tails up, isn't it? And everybody's really looking at this, thinking, you know what? Let's get on a run here. Let's get out of trouble, and then see what we can do in terms of a comfortable mid-table finish. When that Leeds game happened, I was like, right, he looks like he's really got these set up. And then I have to say, I think that was the highest point of management he had with us, where we all felt safe, you know. Perhaps that, and then the 0-0 draw in the derby, even though we were doing so poorly at that stage anyway, there was a feeling, I think, and I'm only speaking for myself here, but generally a lot of people I've spoken to as well, there's that point where you're thinking, do you know what? He can get this done here. He just needs that momentum. He just needs that spark, and then we're going to be okay. And lo and behold, you generally leave that within yourself for far too long, and then all of a sudden you look at things and think, do you know what, Frank? This just isn't working, mate. And to your credit, you said it as early as anybody I know. Like I said, a lot earlier than anybody else knew. But then, you know, you look at yourself in this predicament now, and this is where I move on to the sort of thing that has been hitting the headlines a lot more than Frank Lampard in recent weeks. But when you've then got a really inept and, I would say, idiotic board and owner, you then get into a position where you're like, well, it's pretty obvious this needs changing right now. This was clouded by what else was happening with them, and, you know, fake headlocks and all this nonsense that we've seen from Mashiri going on with the other clown, Jim White. All that stuff started happening almost, and I said this on Twitter yesterday, it gave Lampard a further stay of execution. That's not to say he wouldn't have lasted to this point anyway, given how poor the board have been, and given what we heard Bill Kenwright say after the West Ham game, and Mashiri saying it's not his decision. The insanity seems to go further and further, and certainly what it needed to do, and needed to be. And now we're looking at it, staring down the barrel where 2 games when this manager comes in, whoever it's going to be, which we'll discuss shortly, and you've got Arsenal at home, the leaders of the comfortable leaders of the Premier League coming to Goodison and then going to Liverpool away as their first 2 games. You know, talk about a baptism of fire right there. This has made me feel a lot more angry than I should do, and that's not against Frank Lampard. A lot of people have said, you know, you wish him well and all that, and the sentiment that comes, which I always moan about, in this situation, I actually agree with it to an extent and think, you know what, I do have sympathy with him, given by who he's been ran by, the transfers and all that stuff. But the ultimate price we're paying here is getting into 20 games gone, 19th place, with 2 points from safety. But that's really not too simple to talk about because 2 of the teams in front of us have got games in hand. I know Wolves are one of them and Leeds are the other. Leeds look like they are finally starting to get their act together a little bit. Even though he's gone and we're going to approach a new manager and you hopefully get that bounce, I'm still just as fearful as I was before we've sacked Lampard, if you get what I mean.
It's so difficult, isn't it? Because you wanna have that fire, I suppose, in your belly about the whole situation. But I think especially after last year, there was all that energy and all that fight about trying to get us out of the situation. But there's only so much you can, I don't want to say care, but there's only so much you can have anger towards the whole situation. If this football club's going to be here again in 12 months, do you know what I mean? Because what's the point? What is the point in Everton? Just keep having that, you know, just keep putting their head above the water, and then, you know, just at the end of every season they just survive. What's the point? And I mean, I'm sure, you know, from a financial point of view, that there's a big point in that, you know, it's keeping the football club afloat. But it's so hard because, I mean, it's difficult because I just don't think the fans, and I'm one of them. I mean, you know, after the Southampton game last week, I just had to take myself away from the whole situation and had to swerve watching the West Ham game during the match while it was live on Saturday, because it's just that the depressive state you get into, because, you know, as soon as you concede, you know, the game's gone. You know, as soon as you see the lineup that, and you look at the bench, there's nothing there. There's no spark. There's no hope, I suppose. And it's just, I think everyone's just a bit disillusioned with the whole situation, and that it's not like last season where people can quite clearly, you know, just point the finger at the manager, even though then, you know, and I know people probably won't like to hear that, you know, Rafa Benitez probably wasn't the main problem. He definitely didn't help himself in terms of how he acted, and he should never have been appointed anyway. But those problems still persist today. Tell me, the fact that those problems still persist now suggests that he wasn't the main issue, and he isn't the main issue, and Lampard wasn't the main issue, even though like when he says he is an issue himself. It's not a simple case like in the past with Koeman or with Silva. It's not a simple case where we can just remove the manager, bring someone else in, and just be like, well, we can get on with it now, because you know, this football club's just set up for complete and utter failure, and when that's the case, you know, there's only so much you can do before, you know, the rock completely sets in. You know, it's quite funny actually. I was looking through some old tweets this morning, and I found this thread that I've been adding to it pretty much at the end of every season, and that I think it's now since 2018-19. Yeah, with the season Wolves came up, the promoted team has finished above Everton every single season. You know, I mean, if that's the trend, that's the trend. There's only so many seasons that you can go where a new promoted team finishes above you, where you end up in the bottom 3.
And that's obviously where we've ended up now.
Yeah.
And I know Peter Max joined us now, because I know he's been off doing all sorts of different things, and people who want to speak to him today. Pete, you there, aren't you? Yeah?
I am, yeah.
Yeah. We just starting the chat there. Me and Mike talking about how this has come about, and how he's finally been sacked as Everton manager. We've spoken extensively at the board. Reaching this stage, I mean, I've obviously, like most Blues, I'll have sat there thinking about this for a long, long time. A different question I want to ask to you than what I asked Mike. Do you think this is coming too late? Because I know people are going to bang on and say, not bang on, I don't want to offend them by saying that. People are going to say that, oh, look, we've got this bouncer when a new manager comes in and we've got 18 games left. That's plenty of time, given that we're only 2 points away from safety. But the other side of that is we've just signed, well, we're about to sign a new manager that's going to have less than a week to sort out what transfers they want to come in without any real money to spend. It's going to be loans. Dan Juma obviously is expected to be, I don't know what's going on with that in terms of being announced. If I was him, I'd have gone to the first airport when I seen what had been going on at Everton when he decided to sign for us on loan from Villarreal. I don't think or have as much faith in when we've got new managers in, and obviously most clubs in the way we have in the past, apart from Benitez aside, you get a real level of, I wouldn't go as far as saying excitement, but encouraged by somebody new coming in, and you do get that bounce in general where all the supporters and even the players are all sort of feeling a little bit better about themselves and the club and being able to play better. I don't know who we get, and we'll go into that shortly about potential new managers and what the bookies are saying and all that stuff, but I don't feel the same as I've felt in the past about us sacking a manager far too late. Like Mike said several months ago, he shouldn't have been our manager at that point. I don't feel right now that Everton are in a position where, oh, we can sort all this out now and everyone will be fine. I still feel like things are going to get worse than what they actually are now.
Yeah, I mean, to start, reference to the question about whether we've acted too late. I'm probably guilty of that myself in terms of my opinion of where we were headed. I think the writing has been on the wall for a long time. I think it was just pure blind faith that kept me sort of hoping against hope that Frank could turn it around. And I think a lot of that was probably to do with some misguided loyalty probably from last season, and the fact that I actually really do think really highly of the man. Looking at those, I think that the 3 home fixtures, I kept banging on about this before Christmas, didn't I? About the 3 home fixtures, and I was saying about they're the key. And I wasn't just talking about Frank in terms of Frank Lampard's job. I was talking about they were key to our survival. If we get points on the board in those games, things are looking a lot different. So yeah, I'm probably just as, on a personal level, I was probably as naive as what the board have been in terms of not acting or not thinking we needed to act sooner. So
do you think that's been? Do you think that has been sidetracked by what's been going on with the board? Because I said this last week. I said that Lampard has been given, in my opinion, a further stay of execution as the Everton manager, because most of all of our focus has been on the board and the Mashiri nonsense that we've done podcasts over, the letters, the things that he said on ridiculous radio stations. I personally think that has delayed what has happened today. That's not to say that he wouldn't have been in charge against West Ham, but it always seems when we get rid of managers that it seems to be done like in very cloak and dagger way. It's like Mike, you wouldn't have heard this, but when we started and just before we started, Mike said to me, "Oh, has it been confirmed that he's been sacked yet?" I was like, "Where have you been, mate? He got sacked like a few hours ago." He said, "No, the club itself have still not announced it."
Yeah,
and that, in a nutshell, shows the problems that has been run by a group of idiots, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And this is the main issue. I've just gone onto the official Everton Twitter now as we're talking. Still no announcement. So the whole world knows.
So we're only essentially, I mean, we said this before, we're only essentially talking about this when factually and in literal sense, he's not been sacked yet, other than what everybody media-wise, all of us and everybody else is fully aware of now, that he has lost his job. That shows you how inept this football club is, doesn't it?
Well, look, I mean, if you look at it, I mean, a week ago, Farhad Moshiri was his big defence of the board's record and of the work they were doing. One of the big things he was saying was about communication, and he referred to these letters that he'd sent out with updates, and he was trying to sort of suggest that the Everton board were actually really good at communication. And you look at today, and you think, so these masters of communication forgot to actually confirm it officially and tell the fans that they'd sacked the manager. And if that doesn't sum them up, I don't know what does. It's an absolute farce, Dave. It's an absolute farce. But the other, the next problem we've got is that these same people are now going to make the decision on our next manager, and it's just, we're just going round in circles, aren't we? We're just going round in circles, and in terms of the structure of the club, in terms of where we're going as a football club, in terms of our identity, I think it's been completely lost. I don't know I don't think anyone in charge knows what it is we're aiming for. You look at a team like Brighton, who lost Graham Potter. Within days, they had a new manager in, same sort of style, same sort of, they've got an identity of how they want to play. They buy well, they sell well, they bring in replacements, they have great scouting recruitment. That's Brighton. Wherever, with respect to Brighton, we're Everton Football Club. We've been in the Premier League since its inception. We haven't been relegated in over 50 odd years, 60 years, and we're being run as if we're being run like a circus. But as I say, the problem we've got is that the same people who've made all of these terrible decisions in terms of financially, in terms of managerial appointments, in terms of investing the money with the wrong people, in terms of trusting the money with the wrong people. These same people are now going to make a decision on which manager is going to keep us up, in the Premier League with just 18 games to go.
Seeing, as I say, breaking news, but before we started this, it wasn't released, but David Ornstein, say former colleague of mine, who used to work at the BBC with him, has announced with the Athletic, Marcelo Bielsa among the candidates Everton owner Farhad Moshiri has been talking to about replacing Frank Lampard, 67-year-old Argentine. We know pretty well about him now, don't we? And in the second half of the podcast, we'll go a little bit deeper about this. In terms of the bookies, we might as well get on and talk about this now, because obviously we've spoken about today's news of Lampard leaving. But Mike, Marcelo Bielsa, and I know you want to get a bit deeper talking about this, but your initial response to seeing that has happened, and that Moshiri's already spoken to him by all accounts, and that he appears to be his choice, even though he says he doesn't make the decisions. What are your initial thoughts about that?
I think
as gobsmacked as I am.
I'm just surprised. If this was, mid-June, July, I'd be like, yeah, you know what, let's go for it. But if we're gonna go all in on a madman, then why not? I think people probably underestimate the job he did a little bit. I think how good that team were in the Championship is again goes probably under the radar. And I think the full season during COVID, they were really good. But that's just not the. And this is someone who I really rate Bielsa, but not necessarily someone you want to bring in when you're absolutely desperate for points, I suppose.
Not this late. I say late into a season in inverted commas, because there's 18 games left. But to me, on that, what you've just said is absolutely right. I think you've got somebody that you bring in at the very start or at the very end of a season to initially start his work, and his work is a lot about graft, about getting players into full fitness that is able to every man themselves to be able to constantly go for 90 minutes and throw everything at it. That's what Bielsa means to what I've seen of him, to what he had that lead side doing. The reason why it fell apart for them is that started to break, didn't it, before that he left, and they've ended up with Jesse Marsh. Probably if you think of those two together as what leads a follow it, that is quite a bit of a mess. But and obviously they're one of our relegation rivals. But when I see that, I don't mind about his age. I don't think that really matters, does he? You look at Ancelotti, what he's continued to do and whatnot, and Alex Ferguson, Arsene Wenger. That's not any particular insignificant to me. But you bring him in at this stage now. How's he able to graft with our club, to work with our squad that has been so disappointing, so much of a letdown, and generally poor in terms of the players we have. How does someone who goes in there and wants to get back into everything he's achieved and how he structures a side, how do you go and do that so quickly before the summer's about to come about and we've only got 18 games left? I don't think that's enough. In my opinion, if you're to keep the club up, you go and get a steady Eddie, like people have said, with Dice, and he keeps you up. At that point, when they've done that and confirmed it, that's when you go and look at somebody if you want them to change so much about a club, as in Bielsa.
Yeah, I think I don't completely, obviously, I've just had a look on Twitter myself, and I don't completely buy into the fact that the squad's not exactly made up for someone like Bielsa. I mean, that Leeds team on paper is, we're talking a team that, that came up and then stayed in the Premier League quite comfortably. I mean, I think they finished above Everton when we had Ancelotti. Mm-hmm. That consisted of Luke Ayling, Liam Cooper, Adam Forshaw, those type of players. We're not talking about world beaters, and there's probably more quality in this Everton squad compared to that Leeds team. It's just certain managers, and this doesn't necessarily make them better or worse, in the grand scheme of things compared to other coaches. Just certain managers need a pre-season before going into a new job. I've just had a quick look at his profile on Transfer Market, and he's been managing in Europe since 1998, and I mean, he's had brief spells managing international sides, so they don't really count, but he's never ever taken over a job mid-season before. Every single one has started in June or July, apart from the international jobs with Argentina and Chile. And to be honest, you know what, if they made the appointment and came out and said we're going to stick with Bielsa and we go down, and then he's the person that we want to mould the football club around, then I suppose, okay, I don't really like the view that we're going to stick with him either way, because I don't think football should work like that anyway, because a lot can change in 18 games. But you spoke quite a few characteristics of what we all think of when we think of Bielsa. And I think if, you went and asked, 30, 40 people on Goodison Road, on Saturday afternoon, what do you want from an Everton team? I think there's a lot of similarities in what he does and what we as Evertonians want. And I think that does go under the radar because, we've seen as some chaotic madman, and I think people have, maybe been burnt in the past by bad defences, and I understand that. But I do think in the long term, I think he'd be actually quite a good choice, but just not for the situation. And I think I actually remember when he took over at Leeds, I remember reading how the job came about and how really the Leeds hierarchy and their sporting director, they had to travel to Argentina. They spent nearly a week there having to basically, basically demonstrate all these presentations and portray all these reasons why they wanted him and why they think he'd be a good fit and what they do with the squad and the type of recruitment they'd bring in and how they basically align all these things to Bielsa. That's the type of thing that you need to do for a manager like him. One, I don't think Everton would do that. And two, from what I've read in the past, Bielsa is someone who thinks quite a lot about taking the job or not. And one, we don't have the time for someone who's going to be like, what, cheers for letting me know, I'll come back to you in 10 days. And two, I don't think there's any chance he works with someone like Farhad Moshiri anyway.
I'd add to that, Mike, as well. I don't think we've got a board that's going to go and sit somewhere for a week and show them what they need to do.
I do think if you said, can you come speak to me in Argentina? I think they'd all be on. I think they'd all be on the flight over there.
Brilliant. Just to bring you in on this, Pete, with some of the great explanations that Mike is talking about with Bielsa. I mean, I think many people initially think, wow, this is coming from right field, this going out and getting someone who's quite extravagant. He's very, very well known for how he coaches, the way in which he does things. I think he's a battle of laughs, and I don't mean that in a way in which to talk him down, but I mean that in terms of like Mike said initially, I think that the quote what he said was like, just go for it. But then, like we both pointed out there, to come in midway through a season, which, like Mike says again, that he's never done before. Do you still sort of go with that attitude of it doesn't matter now, just throw both barrels at it and let's see how it goes? Or are you looking at that field of contenders? I mean, let me just read some out here. This is with
Please
odds
don't.
checker. What's that, sorry?
I said, please don't.
Oh, no. With the odds checker, they've got Sean Dyche 6-4, Marcelo Bielsa 3-1. And that's where it starts getting a bit silly, in my opinion. They've gone Duncan Ferguson 6-1. I don't think that's going to happen. I really hope it doesn't happen. Wayne Rooney 8-1. No. Interestingly, Ralph Hasenhüttl, who left Southampton, didn't he? Because I'm sure he said he had the intention of retiring, or certainly retiring from managing over here. So I don't think that's an option. But he's 12/14-1. And then without that list, David Moyes, Santo 20-1, and then you're looking down ones that are really thinking not going to happen. I.e., Leighton Baines, bless him. We hope maybe he's ready for that one day. Vincent Kompany, who's flying with Burnley. Who else? Postecoglou. Don't think that's going to happen for how good he's doing at Celtic. And then you get into really, really silly ones like Diego Simeone. Why on earth he do that again? Say again, because Carlo Ancelotti's below him. They're around 40-1. Thomas Frank, interesting, 140-1. Him, I've had a lot of arguments with friends about this. Thomas Frank, just before you answer this question, Pete, saying, oh, he's a really good manager at Brentford. I completely agree with that. I don't think he wants to come to Everton as much as a lot of chance. Well, exactly. As much as a lot of older fans say, look at the size of our club, who we are, one of the biggest institutions in the country. Why would Thomas Frank want to come here when he'd have to try and save a relegation within 18 games? And he's with Brentford, who could potentially make the Europa League quite comfortably. I don't understand why he'd want to do that. I mean, and it's not like we can throw bags of money at him. And it's not like we could effectively go and get him by paying in his contract. So that's not going to happen. So from what I've read there's three people I think that are probably have chance of getting this. Dyche is the favourite, I think. Bielsa and also look like Santo, who I think we've sort of flirted with a little bit in the past. I mean, that doesn't exactly fill you with thrill, does it?
No, it doesn't. But I'm gonna flip it a little bit and just tell you, I am firmly now behind Bielsa. I'm gonna stick my neck out here and say, get me that madman sitting on a bucket outside, in front of that dugout in Goodison Park.
Sits on a bucket as well.
Under the lights. That man was born for the Gladys Street, I'm telling you now. Whatever happens from now till the end of the season, you get that man in the dugout, and we'll go. If we're going to go down, we'll go down, in a blaze of glory. we will go down fighting, and I tell you what, the fans as I say, born for the Gladys Street. That man, get him in, and that's my 2 pence.
Well, I was going to say, Mike hinted at it before, but you can look at a scenario where we go down and you got him to bring us back up, and for what he did with Leeds to get them up as well. I mean, I hate the notion, and a couple of people have said that to me today. It's like, oh, maybe we need to go down to make things better and come back up. I'm firmly of the belief that if Everton go down, they're not coming back up. In fact, Everton are probably only going to go lower than coming back up. Certainly, given we have who owns the club as well. I don't see how that happens. Your parachute payments and all that and whatnot. We're never going to spend that well. And given that we've appointed previous to that, I really just think that if we go, then we're not coming back. So, let's hope we've got plenty of fans who enjoy going to Coventry and then effectively the MK Dons and then Tranmere, really, if that happens, in my opinion. But I never thought I'd say this, but I sort of disagree with you, but I don't think, Mike, you've said who you actually want to be the manager, aside from the credentials you give us for Bielsa. But I look at this situation and I think the only one that sticks out reluctantly is Dyche. And I've argued so much, saying that I don't want him near our club. couldn't be doing with the type of play and coaching and tactics that he does. But then I suppose that's at the bottom of the list, isn't it? Really, somebody who can actually keep us up, regardless of how we play, is what we need. I don't see anybody else really realistically able to get, because he's sitting there waiting to come back into management. Don't know if you guys seen the chat he had with Sky when he was talking about the way he coached and things like that. I suppose what I'm saying is, throw this to you first, Mike. I'm more worried about the squad we have than the manager we get. Do you think that's fair?
I mean, yeah, but I think.
Is there any manager you just mentioned there? You said Bielsa, never doing that, never doing management mid-season. It's always been before seasons have started or at the end of other seasons.
Yeah.
Given what I can't put in faith that anybody, and I'm talking anybody in football management, can go and sort that squad out to get what we need to do to stay in the Premier League for 18 games. I can't see that as we're able to get a tick out of that lot, such as the way we watch them, what I've seen. It just looks like anarchy. The news about Decore that was thrown out today, that he'd been training on his own because of the argument with Lampard, or there was a general argument amongst the players with Lampard. I don't put faith in that squad to be able to do what a manager wants them to do.
Well, I'll put it the other way. I'll be positive for what I suppose. I've been faithful just in terms of the managers. I'd love Thomas Frank, but yeah, I mean, I echo your thoughts. Really, he signed a new contract on Christmas Eve until 2027. I don't think that necessarily means that he's absolutely off the cards, because I think more surprising things have happened. I think it comes down more so to the fact that are Everton in a position to be able to release Lampard and his staff of their contracts and then go buy someone else out of their contract? And the answer is probably no, especially when the reality is, Thomas, in terms of the short-term goals anyway, are there other people who can do it, who, in terms of keeping us up in the Premier League, are there other people who can do it, in which we don't have to pay certain amounts of compensation that could prevent us from signing certain players? If the answer is yes, then you just don't go get them. Because there's quite a few managers, I think, in jobs who I think would do a really good job. In terms, I mean, you mentioned Bielsa, I suppose, former assistant, Carlos Corberán, who's now at West Brom, has done a brilliant job there. I think could be an option, but again, he's in a job. Will we be able to afford to buy him out of his contract? I mean, it says quite a lot about how this football club's run, that we even have to say that when we're talking about a championship club who themselves are pretty skint. But I think he could be an option if we end up going down and we have to appoint someone again in the summer. I think that's an interesting point, though. I don't think the one thing I don't really want us to do is, unless we go down and the manager leaves on their own accord, I don't really want to be in a position where we have to appoint someone now and then appoint someone again in the summer.
100%.
I think the time to probably do that move was 12 months ago, because I think they just made an absolute balls of last season. Looking back now, the season before, we finished on 59 points. I know we finished 10th, and I know there wasn't a lot of money to spend, but how desperate the football club got after Ancelotti left is just ludicrous looking back. I mean, it's not even like we were mid-season or anything. We were absolutely desperate for a manager. I think he left on June 1st or something like that. I think we had 3 or 4 weeks to hire someone vaguely competent who wasn't Rafa Benitez. But yeah. So yeah, Thomas Frank I would have, but doubt he would come. Sean Dyche, I think, yeah, I think he would come. I think it's too obvious for it to happen now. Everything doesn't work like that. Maybe a little bit unpopular, but I mean, it definitely won't happen now after reading the comments from Danjuma. I think I'd have I've just mentioned Sean Dyche. I'd have David Moyes. I think he was probably the right appointment a couple of years ago in terms of providing that stability. And I'm not saying he's the absolutely perfect manager, because he's not. We've all had that experience in the past. But I think in terms of, and this kind of coincides with Sean Dyche, this isn't and this isn't a vacancy that just needs a good coach or someone capable of uniting the football club. It needs someone with the experience of dealing with difficult situations, and then more. And we've had it firsthand, and West Ham have had it firsthand, that he's someone capable of single-handedly changing a culture and changing, and changing and shaping a recruitment, and that's what we need at the moment. I know it sounds quite silly when, I remember, I was only 12, 13 at the time when he left, but when he did leave, people were, quite happy, I think, mainly because they wanted something new. But there was, that he was seen as this, small time mentality. He was a loser. He obviously still not won anything. We had a horrendous record away from home against, the big teams.
Mm-hmm.
But that type of culture that he set anyway is something that we're absolutely desperate for now, in terms of being able to being able to have a football team that represents what we believe Everton are. And I think if he would be open to the opportunity, it's something I'd go down. But I don't think, again, I don't think we've got the money to pay the compensation. Wayne Rooney, I've got written down here. 12 months ago, I said yes, because I was desperate last 12 months ago. I'd say no now, simply because one of the big positives then was one of his assistant coaches was Liam Messina. He was really highly rated. It was well documented.
Yeah.
It was well documented that he was the one who did quite a lot of the coaching, and he's no longer. He's obviously at Hull now. So
did he not get the job after Rooney left?
Am I right? Yeah. So he got the job in the summer.
Yeah.
He was the caretaker throughout pre-season. I mean, it was very Everton-like from Derby, actually. So he was the caretaker through pre-season, and then first 10 or so games, and then they said, "Oh, we're going to bring someone else in now. So if you want to stay long as coach, then you're more than happy to." And he was like, "I've just done a full pre-season and managed 10 games, and now you're demoting me." So he left and is now at Hull and is doing very well there in terms of how quickly the style of football has changed. I think he's someone to keep an eye on, but I wouldn't have Rooney, simply because it's just too big of a risk. In terms of international managers out of work, I really like Domenico Tedesco, who's at Leipzig, who's out of work, and Marcelino are two managers that I think we should be speaking to.
I mean, like you say there, that's such an extensive list that, again, you refer back to the competence of the board, and you would like to think, Pete, just to bring you back in on this, on the managers list that Mike so excellently said there, you would think that Thelwell would be the person that goes out and looks at this and is the one that decides who we're going to get. You don't look. I don't look at that with any confidence there, because he didn't seem he was looking there with any confidence in the director's box at West Ham at the weekend. But what are you suggesting? What do you feel, and what do you think will happen?
Well, I mean, my first suggestion is that Everton get Mike into it to be some kind of consultant.
I know, it was such a fantastic description, that, wasn't it?
Yes, since we seem to do this merry-go-round every year. Some with Mike's knowledge would probably be quite handy for Everton. That's
exactly why they wouldn't take him, though, mate, because they haven't.
Yeah, he knows too much. Yeah, that's what it is.
I don't think you could afford me either, to be honest.
Yeah, but yeah. So it's I mean, for me, I was probably a little bit flippant before talking about Bielsa. I going into a bit more detail about him, I think the idea of him just being like a sort of a madman is probably one of his attributes, but also he's very analytical, isn't he? He knows every team inside and out. I read something about him where when he got the Leeds job, the way he got it, he basically presented them with a portfolio on every single team in the Championship, and he hadn't managed in England before, and he had literally a portfolio on them. There was obviously that thing where he was he sending cameramen and drones into Derby's
with Frank Lampard, ironically.
Yeah, with Frank Lampard, ironically, yeah. And he literally, and then when he got asked about it, he didn't say, "Oh no, it didn't," or he wasn't ambiguous. He did a full presentation.
He just said,
to the
"Yeah,
press.
Sorry." That was it, really, wasn't it?
But he didn't even do that. He went into the press and did a full presentation on a breakdown of Derby's entire tactical layout, basically, and did a presentation to them and said, "Yeah, I do that." That's
just
just
doesn't give a shit.
He doesn't, yeah. But actually, behind that madness is actually a really clever, a really dedicated football man who's got a wealth of experience and unbelievable knowledge of the game. But also, I mean, looking at comments from Leeds supporters, obviously the type of football that he plays, it is so high intensity, and it is sort of, you know, high energy, high intensity. The press that he does, and he's obviously, you know, instructs his team so well, and he gets them ultra fit. That type of football, as you know, as we've seen with that lot across the park, you can't really keep that up over a long period of time before the players start getting burnt out. And I think that's basically what happened with Leeds, where a lot of their players just looked, you know, dead on the feet by the end. But having said that, I think if anyone can come in and sort of do a job with these players, command the respects of these players, and get these players working, I will be behind Bielsa. And the more I think about it, the more I feel like it fits. And the other way to look at it as well is that he's got a portfolio on every team in the Championship. I'd be full of confidence if the worst did come to the worst and we were to go down. I feel like he'd be a good choice to actually be in a position to get us back up. And you know, again, it's about the culture, isn't it? I feel like Bielsa, he offers that sort of connection with the fans, which I know that's, you know, a sort of a thing that we've you know, we've been a bit annoyed about when this sort of thing about connection with the city gets thrown out there. But I genuinely think that we do need a level of that at the moment because of the divide. Obviously, Evertonians, we're always going to back the team, and whoever comes in as manager, we're going to back them all the way. Any other things that happen off the pitch, that's separate. But when it comes to those 90 minutes, we're backing them players and the manager. But I feel like Bielsa is the type of manager who can come in and really, you know, take on the culture of a football club and also put his stamp on it and put his mark on it. So, you know, I look at Sean Dyche and I feel like, I think that'd be another 18-month appointment at most. I think, regardless of if he kept us up this season, next season, we'd probably be looking at a new manager again.
Is that not the dilemma, though, Pete? I mean, with what you've just said there.
Yeah.
I mean, the issue I've got with that is, and again, the Bielsa chat that we've had in general, and Mike's excellent analysis of them and things on yourself. With that, I struggle with that in the sense of the 18-game thing, because what you've just both explained so eloquently about Bielsa, they're things that take time. I wouldn't be wrong saying that, would I? Both of you?
No.
Pete, I wouldn't. That's not me talking
out
of. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
so what I'm saying is that in 18 games, I guess the obvious question is: would you not trust Dyche more than him on getting us to stay in the Premier League inside 18 games? And I'm inclined to say I'd lean, and I can't believe I'm saying this because I'd want Bielsa dearly as Everton manager in any sort of context, because I've liked him and been a fan of him for a long time since I initially saw him at Leeds. But for the horse for the course that we need now is someone keeps us up. This feels, and again, don't want to say it, but I'm going to, what we did with Allardyce. I'm not saying I want Allardyce again, by the way, but getting Dyche now is to sort out 18 games and get us to stay in the Premier League before the summer. It's a job like that, isn't it? It's you need somebody to come in quickly, sort out a side, get them to stop conceding goals and winning games 1-0. Like, he'd come in, Dyche, he'd come in, if you got him in tomorrow, he'd come in, put 5 at the back, and say the most important thing we need to do is keep a clean sheet against Arsenal and Liverpool, and then let's have a look at the games that come in February, which will ultimately decide whether we go or whether we stay up. That to me is sadly more appealing than getting a Bielsa in now who's trying to turn almost everybody in that squad a full 180 and to do something else fitness-wise with them. That's what I'm feeling. It's obviously slightly different to what you two said. I mean, I know you didn't say, mate, go and get him right now. Pete, you did, because you were like, yeah, just go and get him, and, you know, whatever will be, will be. But the desperate side of this is to get us to stay in the Premier League. Would you not say the somebody of that fitting like Dice is the only one you could get for a short-term period before you go ahead and look at Bielsa in the summer and others that maybe are in your mind to consider?
I think one way to look at it as well is that just because of just how thorough he is and how analytical he is, he'll know Everton players inside out.
Would he? I mean, I suppose from that, Pete, to bring you in, Mike, with this.
Talking about Bielsa, I mean.
Yeah, that's what I mean. But I'm saying that he's not just somebody who's going to come in with the same pack of cards, is he? Is him, both to your knowledge here, somebody who come in and be quite versatile in what he could do, and thinking, do you know what, this isn't a side that has a load of players that I could do when I was at Leeds. I got a load of people who would just run into the floor for him. I guess from what you've said in terms of his knowledge of the game and what he's done, he'd have a different approach if he absolutely needed it.
Yeah, I think another thing to consider as well is that I don't think he's the type of. I think if he did get the job, I think he would be fully confident that he could work with the players that he's got, and that's one of the big problems that we've had.
But do a different tactic though, Pete. I mean, because these lads I don't reckon could play like Leeds did. Basically, is what I'm saying, quite bluntly.
No, but I think because of the type of person he is, and because of the type of knowledge and depth of knowledge that he's got, and as I say, he'll know every single player at Everton inside and out. Like this guy is literally 24/7 football. I don't think he'd accept the job if he didn't believe that he could get a tune out of them. And I don't think he'd be naive enough to think that he could come into a club and just expect them to have those energy levels that, to play exactly as he had Leeds playing. I think he'd probably be. He'd do you know what I mean? He'd take the job on the basis that he would know, or he'd have an idea of how he would get this particular group of players to play. I mean, again, it's all, it's all just my opinion.
Of course.
I just look at this list of potentials, and he's my standout. Sean Dyche for me. He's obviously been in this situation before, but he has been relegated before. He was sacked by Burnley last season because, they thought that, he wouldn't get them out of trouble. And I think I look at Dyche, and as much as I think he's a decent manager, and he did a fantastic job at Burnley over the years, but I just don't think that would. I think the other thing as well, you've got to keep in mind as well, is that the fans need someone who's going to give them a boost, someone who's going to sort of galvanize the fans again. We need that desperately. We need it desperately, Dave. And I just feel that going into sort of, again, it's just my opinion. I feel like Bielsa's got not only the tactical nous, the knowledge, the dedication to football, the experience, but also I feel like he could really get that connection with the supporters again. And as I say, if the worst did come to the worst, I'd feel confident that he'd get us back up.
Mike?
This on Bielsa, is it? Yeah.
Yeah. I suppose compared to the dilemma we've got when I've just said there about Dice being more appropriate for 18 games than Bielsa, I suppose what I've said.
I agree with you, and I think that the challenging thing, and I'll go back to my point before, and that there's no evidence of Bielsa taking over the team mid-season. So, I mean, you don't know whether he'll adapt or not because he's not had to in the past. The one thing I will say, and I forgot to mention it before in terms of when I said I'll try and come at this from a positive point of view. Going back to the data side of things, Everton are absolutely dreadful at the moment in terms of every statistic you could think of. They are, relegation. They are a relegation football team. They've been poor for absolute donkeys, and yet we somehow find ourselves in a position where, if we'd beaten Southampton and we'd beaten West Ham, I think we'd be on 21 points and we'd be 13th in the Premier League, and we'd have 4 or 5 points between us and the relegation zone. It's like we've spent half the season being dreadful, and yet we could still absolutely comfortably survive if someone comes in and makes even just a difference, not a massive difference, but enough, and does enough. you know, we've been that bad, and yet we're not dead and buried, if you get me. And I think it's also important to point out how tight it is at the moment. I mean, I said, you know, we're 6 points away from 13th, but there's also there's no Norwich or Watford like there was last year. You know, they finished on 22 and 23 points, I think it was. And I think it was Burnley went down on 37. I think, you know, I think 17th. I think you can finish 17th and finish on 35, 36 points, which to me, you know, you need someone to come in and just get over 1 point per game. And is Bielsa capable of that? And then getting to this, is Bielsa capable of that? And then saying, right, let's just get to the summer, just survive. I'd say, yeah, he is capable of that. But it's that, and Peter's mentioned it in that he's because he's such a madman. And because he's, you know, his Leeds time, I suppose, and the way it ended, it was also chaotic and you know, the amount of goals they conceded in the final few months, really, under while he was at Leeds. You know, it either goes so brilliantly and Everton survive comfortably, or it's horrific. And I think when you're in that type of dilemma, you have to turn around and say, right, can we afford to take that risk? And I don't think we can.
Yeah, I mean, just to finish off the pod here, this is the big dilemma with all of us, isn't it? Because you can't simply just move the board to one side and think that they're not going to have an impact of what we've seen of quite a ridiculous level in the last few weeks. So, you know, with the Bielsa thing, just the final say that I've got on him, I'd love to see them in the same boardroom, all of them, and asking him questions. And if he's lost a couple of games, or if he's trying to explain what player he wants to sign, how they've received this, given the way that we sign players, I think it'd be quite amusing, really. There could be one of those amazing Amazon documentaries, couldn't there, if he's the manager? I mean, I'd love to see one at Everton anyway, given how ridiculous we've been. But with Marcelo Bielsa coming in to an Everton dressing room, I think just be quite fantastic to watch. Regardless of who we get, you still think we're going to stay up?
I'll be honest, Dave, if you would have asked me yesterday, I would have said no, but for some reason, whether it's just blind faith, I feel like now the change is happening. I think we've got a good chance. I think we've got a good chance, and I think the way Mike summed it up as well was perfect in terms of how tight the league is and how we could get out of this. Obviously, the decision's massive on who the manager is, but yeah, if we can somehow galvanise and we can somehow get the spirit back in the side and maybe add a few faces, you know, you only have to get I say we've only won 3 games all season, but if you start getting a couple of good results together, then you fly up that table. And also, you know, a lot of the teams who are sort of in and around us, they've had, you know, a few peaks in this season where they've gone on good runs. We're yet to have one, and you'd like to think at some point we will go on, or we, you know, again, it's blind faith in it. You'd like to think that at some point we could actually start like getting a couple of results back to back. I'm looking at the games after Arsenal and Liverpool and thinking, well, if we can get a manager in and settled, don't disgrace ourselves against those two, and then go into those home games. You know, we've got a chance. We've got a chance.
Mike, the old adage, I think when teams go down from the Premier League is you deserve it. Like, people don't go down unless they deserved it. There's very fireworks going off here. I don't know if you've signed someone. I don't know if that rings true all the time when you see teams get relegated because they deserve to. If I think many of us would say the way in which Everton have handled themselves in well, let's say recent years, but also this season in particular, given what's happened with the board and all that, couldn't really complain about going down from that aspect of things. But like Pete said there, do you not feel we'd have really dodged every bullet really if we stayed up, given what we've done this season?
Yeah, I think really Everton deserved to go down this season as it stands.
Yeah. That's taking your Everton hat away, of course, because I don't want us to say out to listeners like, oh yeah, I can't stand Everton, that's why we should go down.
I mean, the only way I can put it is that, you know, if I was a Nottingham Forest fan or I was a Leeds fan, you know, at the moment, I'm counting my blessings because Everton are in the league. Do you know what I mean? It's like that's that and Southampton and Bournemouth, that's they're the relegated teams, you know. So I think that's why we had to make the decision, and I agree with Peter really. And if you'd asked me, would I think we go down? You know, if you asked me yesterday, I'd say yes. And today, I mean, I have to be more optimistic. Otherwise, what's the point of making the decision?
Yeah.
But I suppose, I think, and this is why we had to make it, because I think it wasn't no longer a point of Everton are sleepwalking towards relegation. It was like, we have all of our eyes are wide open and we can see exactly what we're walking into, and no one's doing anything about it. The football club as a whole could not let the season finish and us be relegated and turn around. And I mean, I'm talking from a hierarchy point of view here. They couldn't turn around and be like, you know, we've done everything that we could to keep this football club. I mean, they couldn't say that anyway, but it mean it very simplistically. They couldn't turn around and say we've done everything that we could to keep this football club in the league this season and not change the manager. Because ultimately it's not been good enough, and I think now we have to hope that they get the decision right. I think hopefully a decision's made by next weekend, and that gives them a full week to Arsenal, and hopefully we can get through the first two games against them and Liverpool without absolute batterings, and then there's 4 or 5 games in a row where I think we can get a big bulk of points. But I think after those fixtures, I think we'll really see where we are.
I think you're both spot on there. I mean, it feels like Everton need to do a due diligence towards, and they owe it to all of us as fans 10 times over, more than 10 times over, in terms of getting us people in there who can actually try and do something rather than just keeping the same things that what we've got and ultimately going down without even giving it a try elsewhere. But as always, boys, thanks so much. Some really, really good insight from the pair of you as usual. For everybody that's listened to this, we got, as you can imagine, podcasts after podcasts after podcasts, given what's going on at Everton. Frank Lampard sacked, the board back involved, trying to get us a new manager. We'll see who that is. Hopefully we'll get them sooner rather than later, given the situation. That remains to be seen. You never know what's going to happen with those group of people involved at Everton Football Club. Thanks so much for listening to us, and no doubt we'll speak to you really, really soon.